All right. Welcome to Lee County Podcast. Your host, Pete Melidnik, is going to host our efforts today. Our guest today is Levi Hill, writer, journalist. Pete, go ahead and start us off.
Hunter animal lover, is there a contradiction? That's our topic for today. Levi, I'll start with this. How could you kill animals and at the same time say you love them?
Well, that's a good question. I think a lot of people wonder that, and I think, like I've said in some writings I've done in the past, it's a very dichotomous experience hunting. There's pride, there's love, there's sadness. I love animals. I mean, I just do, right? And my big example in loving animals and hunting is my father. Okay, I probably never met a man that was more successful at hunting than Dad. He spent the time in the field learning how the animals acted, and it wasn't just to hunt them, it's because he loved them. He used to work for U.S. Fish and Wildlife, photographing migratory bird patterns. I didn't realize that till after he passed, and I found a bunch of slides of his, and Mom was telling me about it. But a more successful hunter you've never met. But at the same time, animals always gravitated toward him. He used to feed scrap food to hogs out in the pasture to keep them coming in so he could, knew where they were so he could hunt them. But at the same time, he had a pet bunny rabbit that lived out at one of the places he would feed, and he'd hand feed it every time he went out there. It's kind of, we get into the talking about this, and as you and I spoke briefly through a message earlier, we were talking about Aldo Leopold, one of the great conservationists of our time, was an avid outdoorsman and loved animals, but still hunted. And I think when we talk about his land ethics that he discussed in his topics of man's role in nature, that's a topic of we have to learn that we're not the conqueror king of nature, but we play a role in it. And God gave man dominion over the animals. A lot of people seem to think that that means we're Lord and ruler. That's not what it means. We're there to be both a predator and an aid to the animals around us. You can go hunt a deer this year and shoot it and take it home and feed your family. But what happens when you find one tangled up in a fence? The very same guys that hunted one in the fall find one tangled up in a fence and free it and nurse it back to health and let it go. It's not an easy thing for a person to say I love something and still destroy it. But I think you as a poet would really resonate with the words of Oscar Wilde when he says, yet each man kills the thing he loves. The poor man, or the coward does it with lies, and the brave man with the sword. So I really think it's we're still recording. I really think it's a very, very hard thing for some people to accept that you can love something and still destroy it, but it's part of our role in nature.
And I'm involved to some extent in the animal wellness community, and I have eaten meat all my life. And
right.
I love animals.
Right.
If somebody says to me, how could you say that? Aren't you being hypocritical? My reply would be, I've been doing it all my life. It's been in my culture. Nothing's impossible. I could go without meat or chicken or fish, but I haven't tried that. Right. I don't feel it's a contradiction.
How could it be a contradiction? You see all the time in this modern age of social media videos of animals that would normally be a predator-prey situation getting along. There's videos out there of animals actually loving each other, and yet one is normally the prey and one is normally the predator. It's not unnatural. We are a predator by nature. God made us that way. We sustain ourselves off the animals, but love is a very powerful force, and loving something and having to destroy it at the same time, you have to come to the realization that all things die. All things are destroyed at some point. And there's a cycle there that you have to be a part of.
What about the difference between responsible hunting and irresponsible hunting?
Well, in this modern age of sportsman hunting, which I'm not a big fan of, you do run into, again, we talked about the great conservationists of our of the past 150 years. People like Teddy Roosevelt, Aldo Leopold, a great many other folks. They were avid outdoorsmen. They hunted, but they also worked to save things. And I've lost where I was headed with that. What was the question again?
Well, irresponsible hunting.
Oh, irresponsible hunting. Again, Dad was a huge hunter, and he preserved animals as much as he hunted them. But you will run into people these days that they don't see themselves, again, as part of that cycle. They're above that cycle. And I'll give you a prime example. I was in Africa last year on a hunt, and there was a man in camp that was there his, 20-something time. Loved Africa, loved the animals, loved the place so much that he had started a nonprofit foundation over there to help orphan children. They were building a school and stuff. Well, he went to hunt. Everything he hunted, he didn't hunt for trophies. He hunted animals for meat, and the meat was used to feed the orphan children. Okay, well, him and I got to sit down and talking, and he loved Africa like I love Africa, right? He knew about the animals, he knew about the culture, he knew about the history and the people. And he had a group of guys come in while we were there that were from Texas. And these were Texas hunters in every derogatory sense of the word. They had their beer in their hand, and their first words were, "Let's go shoot something." And he was trying to tell them things about, oh, this animal this, or oh, these people are this. They weren't listening to it. And I felt so sad for him because he was trying to share his love with people that had no love to give, no love in them for what he was in love with. Yeah, he hunted those animals, but he loved seeing them, loved being around them, loved the people, the continent. These guys were just there to put a trophy on the wall to brag about. And I run into those guys a lot, through my years of hunting, especially going down to Texas and stuff. And Africa, you run into people that go and all they can see is a big set of horns on the wall. They have no appreciation for the animal that they're hunting other than it looks cool on the wall. And so, yeah, there's those that don't love animals. But, they're the same people that probably don't love their fellow man all that much.
Okay, I do have to interject here, I think. Basically, it's a question. Do you see it as I think it's an issue of stewardship.
Exactly.
You see, and again, you mentioned you hunt for food, and then you see an animal tangled up in the barbed wire, and you either attempt to free it or you put it out of its misery. You keep it from suffering.
Right.
So there's the issue of stewardship rather than just a simple. I mean, how do you see that? How do you see the role of stewardship in what we're doing here?
Exactly. Stewardship is key. We talk about hunting. No one provides more money for animal preservation than hunters. We pay taxes, we pay hunting fees. In Africa, the vast majority of money spent that preserves animals is spent by hunters, literally to the tune of about 5 or 6 times what tourists spend for the big parks, the big national parks and so forth. And I think Aldo Leopold may have said it best, and I pulled it up here and I saved it knowing that we were coming into this conversation. He said, when we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. And again, I think it comes back to stewardship. And again, we love the animals. We want them to persevere. As a hunter, you want that to be there so that you can hunt it all your life, that your children will be able to experience that. Again, it's a very dichotomous thing to hunt because there is pride and there is happiness in the success of the hunt. But for me personally, there's a lot of sadness. I hate to see the animal die. Eventually it will die. Eventually, it'll become food for another animal, whether it be the worms or a predator. You won't see it. I get to see it. I think Robert Rourke said that animal is never truly immortalized until it has been hunted by a man who will carry the memory of it long into, to his grave. So even the animal, the closest it gets to being immortalized is maybe to be hunted, and whether it's successfully hunted or not, sometimes just seeing it. I've been out in the wild and seen animals that I'll carry the memory with to my grave. Maybe 1 in 20 people, maybe 20 people in the world will ever see that same animal. It'll live its life never having anyone known it existed, but it existed.
I remember being up in the Guadalupe Mountains a few years back, well over 10 years ago, and seeing a snake swallow a little bunny rabbit.
Right.
It seemed rather horrific to me and grotesque, simply because I wasn't used to it, but it's probably, I don't know if it's an everyday occurrence, it might be, but I remember that when we were talking, Levi, I looked up Leopold's well-known essay, Thinking Like a Mountain, and as I said, the gist of that to me is if we start killing off the wolves, we will be disrupting the natural balance of nature, because the wolves keep the herd of the deer down, and too many deer are going to mess up all the foliage and trees.
Well, man has replaced a lot of the predators as the predominant population control, right? So before white man came to the American continent, the buffalo herds roamed in the tens of probably millions across this continent. There were wolves in New Mexico all the way down through Mexico. There was grizzly bear all the way down into Mexico. They have been replaced by man, and man now uses somewhat scientific methods in saying, okay, an area can support this population, we'll provide this many hunting licenses, this many people were successful last year, so we didn't take as many as needed, so this year we're going to put out more hunting licenses to get the animal take rate down. And it's all about population management. It's become very scientific, but nature was doing it for tens of millions of years before we came along. We've disrupted the natural order of things. Could that be helped? No, but when you look at it, the wolves are now gone from New Mexico. They've reintroduced them, but the original, populace was wiped out. The grizzly bears were wiped out. You look at one of probably the most underappreciated animals for their tenacity is a coyote. In the western progression of white man, the coyote is the only species on the North American continent whose range has actually expanded without wolves there to help keep their population down and grizzly bears. The coyotes have become a predominant predator, and their range has spread nearly the entire North American continent, pretty much the entire North American continent, which historically it wasn't. They're a very tenacious animal. Dad hunted them for predator control, for ranching. He worked for the state of New Mexico, keeping them down back in the 70s. But he had a great respect for them because they are such a tenacious little animal that they will survive. They can survive man, they can survive everything else, and not only survive but expand and do well. I lived in Denver for about a year, going to gunsmith school, and one day I was driving, we're talking the heart of Denver, it's 20 miles to the city limits, and there goes a coyote running across the road with somebody's house cat in its mouth, So they will survive in the conditions that most animals don't. Most large predators don't. So we've definitely disrupted the natural order of things, and we have to now take our place as a responsible moderator of the population controls and so forth.
Many people who are anti-hunters, and I don't have any statistics or anything, this is just something I surmise, are also anti-breeders, especially in regard to dogs. Maybe cats don't breed because there are already so many of them around, which I can see the sense of that, but do they go too far in trying to force their values on others?
Well, that's a tough question. I'm personally an anti-breeder because we have so many unwanted dogs and cats. You see them every day. I bet there's 100 dogs a day posted on the Facebook page I'm on for Odessa. 100 a day that are unwanted.
Yeah.
Why are we breeding when we have this many unwanted? And again, the animal is no longer respected as a living being. It's now an accessory. The little poodles, the little dogs, women buy them like they buy purses. And it's an accessory to show off to my friends. Look at my cute little dog, and now go sit in the corner and wait for me to want to talk to you again. Where it's not respected as a living being. It's looked at as an accessory that is disposable. And we've become a very disposable society. I'm not a big fan of breeders. I also, you think, I love animals. I love seeing them. I love going to Africa. I can have a great day hunting and not shoot a thing because I've seen the animals. But I hate zoos because the animals in those zoos are kept in captivity. They're not living their natural lives. They're not free. Yeah, they're taken care of, sure. But would you be happy sitting in your house all day as long as somebody dumps some food down the chimney twice a day for you? No. You want to go out and live your life. You want to see things. You want to, it's just, I don't do zoos. It's a thing I don't care for. And I'm not a big fan of breeding. Now, breeding for population sustainability, I absolutely support that. In Texas, there are some species that you can hunt in Texas that are not available anywhere else in the world. The scimitar oryx was completely wiped out of Africa and was only reintroduced into Africa in the last decade. The only reason the species is not extinct is because it was exported to Texas, where Texas hunting ranches were breeding it for hunters. The only place now, there is a country in Africa that's reintroduced the scimitar oryx and has limited hunting availability, but the species was completely eradicated from the continent of Africa if it hadn't been for Texas hunting ranches keeping a breeding population alive. There's, I can't think of the names now, but there's several species of ungulates, deer or elk that are only available to hunt in Texas because either they've been wiped out in their native countries or their population numbers are so small that they don't support it. They're on the verge of extinction in their native ranges. So responsible, again, we have to step in and do our job as a responsible human being as part of the cycle. We're responsible for the loss of that species, and we are now responsible for sustaining it and bringing it back. I was in Africa in 21, and where we hunted was a huge ranch that had been a sheep ranch for nearly 100 years. The family had owned it for nearly 100 years, and for about 80 years of that 100 years the family had owned that ranch, there was not a single native species on that land. They had wiped out all the native African species off that land to raise sheep. Sheep over there were very much like cattle are in the United States. They are the cash crop. The wool and the meat. They eat a lot of sheep over there in Africa. They make a lot of sheep sausage. Well, about 25 years ago, the patriarch of the family realized that there was money to be made in hunting. And so they came in and stopped sheep farming and started buying breeding pairs, and they have repopulated a huge, I bet it's 100 square mile swath of Africa with native species that now live there again for the first time in 100 years. And that's what hunting can do when done responsibly.
Being a non-hunter and also being a reader, I've read, well, we go back to Hemingway too, but in prose, poetry, fiction, nonfiction, accounts of hunting that I don't know another word to say than celebrate the beauty that there is in hunting.
Sure.
Could you comment on some of that?
Yeah, there's a lot of again, human beings have a natural role. We are a predator. species. If you need any more biological evidence than every predator species on the planet, you look at any mammal predator species, now maybe not crustaceans and so forth, but every mammal that is a predator on this planet, their eyes are situated to the front of their head. Okay? All prey species, their eyes are on either side. That gives them a wilder field of view so that they can watch for predators. But as a predator, you focus in on one target. So their eyes on all predators are on the front of their faces. Lions, tigers, bears, anything that's a predator. Because they focus in, they pick a prey and they are after it. Humans, our eyes are on the fronts of our faces. We are by nature a predator. There is a great sense of being part of something more than yourself when you're out hunting. When you put aside the daily grind, the job, the boss that drives you nuts, the nagging wife, the screaming kids, the having to pay bills, and just completely immerse yourself in the role of being what you were, what your ancestors were, right? Being in that role, there is a feeling, I cannot put words to it, that you feel a piece of yourself that is missing in your everyday life. And it is all too often gone in a split second. I'll tell you a moment in my life that was so touching. So I went on a hunt with a man and his son down into Texas, and they had a little piece of land. And it was early morning, and we'd gone out and we climbed up on the edge of this mesa. And I sat down in the brush, and it was a cold morning. You could see your breath. The sun was just coming up. And I rifled my hands. We were looking for feral hogs, and we were right on the verge of, you cross the Red River, which is about 150 yards in front of us, and there was cultivated fields. But all around there was, wilderness. There were trees and so forth. And you sit there and you're in the mode of hunting. There's birds singing in the brush. The sun's starting to come up. You can hear the turkeys gobble down the way. You look and there's deer feeding along. And it was a moment of pure bliss. And I was just so wrapped in that moment. I felt at peace, right? For probably the first time I'd felt in years, because I was suddenly, all that mattered was where I was and what I was doing, and all those other things, bills and just trying to get by, and all of that was gone. It was just me in that moment with all those, being in nature with all the rest of nature around me. And then the guy's son goes, "Daddy," and asks a question. Well, that shattered the moment. But that moment, which was so brief, it kind of comes over you in a wave. It's again, it's very hard to explain, but I would say it's almost euphoric.
Boy, and it gives us an idea just of the hunting being part of the mystery of nature, the glory of the natural world.
Right. You're sitting right there and you're watching nature around you, which you don't get to do living in a city. And you're a part of it, right? You've got a role to play, and everything else there has a role to play. And there's just a connectivity to the nature when you're there. And I think a lot of people seek it. A lot of really avid hunters are always seeking that moment. And I think, like so many great things in life, it's fleeting, and you don't always attain it when you go after it. Sometimes it comes unexpectedly. But I think everyone that's an avid hunter, they don't necessarily hunt for the joy of killing. They hunt that moment. They hunt that feeling. That's why you hunt. You hunt that connection to the primordial self that you do not get in everyday living.
And you're not going to get it by watching wild nature.
I hate watching hunting shows. It's you're seeing other people get to experience it. It's kind of like watching, your next door neighbor win the lottery. You're jealous. You're happy for him in a way, but at the same time you're jealous. And when you watch a hunting video, for me, it's always like, man, I'm watching somebody else hunt that moment that I don't get to hunt because I'm stuck at the house or waiting to go back to work tomorrow or something. So,
Good.
yeah.
Let me sort of follow up here on a theme. While hunting can be a solitary experience, it's also a very communal experience.
It can be, yes.
Usually, especially at certain seasons, whether it's deer season or elk, people go up in groups.
It's not a thing like it used to be.
True.
Hunting camps are a thing of the past. When hunting license were over the counter, you could just go and hunt. Now it's by draw. If 10 members in your family put in to go hunt, maybe 2 of you get a license now because of game management, which is done responsibly. That's a great thing. I'm all for that. But we do lose some of that and again, this is a primordial thing. The men went out and hunted in groups. And they may be gone for days or a week at a time out trying to track down the buffalo or the mastodons or whatever. And there is this, I think it's very much probably like being in the military, which I haven't served, but there is this camaraderie that you build with the other men. And I think especially for young boys, it's a great experience for learning about what being a man is, because around that campfire on the hunting experience, you're going to witness the good and the bad in every person around you. Some people are more respectful, some are less. Some guys too pushy with his jokes, some guys are slightly abusive. But there is this whole coming of age thing that I think a lot of kids miss out on because we don't have those hunting camps. We don't have young men, young women, they would stay at the camp and the girls would learn what it was like to be a woman around the other women. But the young girls don't get that anymore. Young boys don't get the hunting experience. They don't get to go and spend time with other men and determine what kind of man they want to be. I grew up watching John Wayne movies and I always wanted to be like John Wayne. Well, these young boys these days don't have role models that I would consider positive necessarily. You've got rap music guys and a lot of people that, are all about, making money and, banging hoes and making doughs or whatever, whatever the slang is these days. But good positive male role models, sometimes even negative role models are good. You look and you see what you don't want to be, and I think hunting camps, though, the lack of those deprive kids of the chance to be around other men and see what kind of a man they want to grow up to be.
Okay, I think you hit something very important there because as a kid, I had the experience of going up with family and hunting, and we went up in a camp. We went up, and there were several of my father's work friends, and they were friends. They weren't acquaintances. They were friends. They were buds, and they would crowd into the trailer. We're talking about 5 guys crowded around a little camp trailer table, drinking coffee. My mom was handing out the brownies, and that's one of the odd things is that my mom was actually one of the hunters. She would go out and hunt. She would. She was a better shot than my dad was.
Sure, my mom was better than my dad.
And that's one thing I think. And again, it's one of the things that I think that we do miss is that the community, if you will, because.
You weren't sitting there playing on your cell phone the whole time.
We didn't have them.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
And being able to disconnect from that.
But the thing is, the stories. The stories that
oral
you
traditions.
heard.
Yes.
You heard when you were that 10-year-old kid sitting up in the bunk bed, and you got to listen to these guys talk about work, talk about their military service, talk about what they were planning to do, talk about old times.
Talk about their fears and their hopes and their dreams.
All that.
And you learned more than you could probably ever imagine from just listening to those men talk.
Tell me about your experience with that.
So I don't guess I've ever had that. We never did the big hunting groups when I was growing up. But my big thing was always going hunting with Dad. He's passed. But we would go hunt with Dad, and at night, sitting around, we had a little camper that was an over-the-cab camper on the back of an old GMC pickup, and of course, no cell phones and no TV and light. We sat there and maybe played cards or just talked, but it was by lantern light, and he would tell us stories of hunts and different things like that, and his take on whatever was on his mind at the time. And, it wasn't the same experience. I wish I'd had what you're talking about there with everyone, but it was just my family group, Dad, Mom, me, and the brother. But it was a very binding moment. As family, you come together and you're all there and you're not distracted, and you really get to just be with one another, right? And get to learn more about each other and be a family and realize all of that, what that entails. So.
One famous literary work that does give a good account of the hunting camps that you're talking about is especially the first part of William Faulkner's novella, The Bear, and very moving. And you see you really get the idea, the truth that what we're talking about are living creatures with flesh and blood, heart and soul, and that's when I hear the word trophy, I say, human beings are not trophies, and neither are animals. So before I would see a mounted head on a wall or something and think nothing of it, but as my experience grew, I say, no, that's not for me. It's the last thing I would do.
Right. Well, I think for me, there's two schools of thought on that. Of course, as we talked about earlier, you've got your Texas hunters that need that trophy on the wall to brag about.
Yeah.
And for me, it's not bragging rights. It's a memory. It's the part that I bring home, and I went to a meeting once with some guys, and they were showing off the animal they had just shot. And I said, well, tell me the story. And they looked at me funny, and they said, what do you mean? I said, tell me the story of your hunt. Tell me about hunting this big trophy mule deer buck that you shot. I mean, tell me the story. Well, we got up, they drove us out, and we shot it. And that was their story. And to me, I'm like, there's no trophy there. So here's a picture of this little tiny mule deer buck I shot. Let me tell you about how we walked through the sand for 7 miles, and I nearly died of dehydration. And we had to go up the mountain and down the mountain, and I started telling them a story about hunting Cape buffalo, which, again, anybody that I think goes to hunt them, if you don't read about the animal first, you do not respect what you are doing in that moment, because the Cape buffalo is a very, very tenacious animal, and once you have wounded one, more often than not, they try to kill you back. So it's an adrenaline rush experience, but if you don't go into it knowing what you're going up against, you don't appreciate the seriousness of the moment, right? So I started telling them the story about the buffalo and how I shot this one out of the herd, and then the whole herd chases us. Well, they all got this ashamed look on their faces and started playing on their phones, ignoring me. It's a very exciting story. Everyone I've told it to that listens is like, wow, that is amazing. That's an incredible story. That is so cool. But these guys didn't have a story, right? That trophy was something to brag about. Again, it's like, look at my Gucci watch or my purse or whatever. For me, those trophies that I bring home, each one has a story. And I treasure most, you're talking about growing up in those camps, I treasure most of those hunting stories from my dad. And most of them were unsuccessful. Well, let me tell you about the time I hiked over 3 mountains after this elk and never did get a shot at it, And we did this and I did that, and I left before the sun came up, and I got home at 10 o'clock, and all I had to light the way was a candle, I love those stories. Those, and those are oral traditions, and I wish I'd had a recorder to record them, because they're slipping away from me as I get older, and I might have heard them 100 times. He probably told me the same story 100 times, but now that he's gone, I'm losing those stories because I can't remember every detail. He remembered it because he lived it.
So your experience, you respect the animals.
Absolutely.
Because they're just not simply there to serve you.
No.
They're part of your life.
They are.
And that's why they are important, is because they exist simply because They're part of creation.
My daddy always said he never felt closer to God than when he was out in the woods, because every one of those little creatures is God's creation. I don't know. I've never felt more at peace than when I'm out hunting, and I don't have to shoot something. I just have to go out and step into that role, carry a rifle, and know that any moment I could hunt. I could shoot, take my place as a predator, and just walk through the woods and know that that is my place. And I think that's part of the thrill of hunting something like Cape Buffalo, is now you're not just predator, but you're also prey. And then now you're tapping into another side of yourself that your ancestors had to, as they were hunted by the saber-toothed tigers and the Arctic, the bears of the time that are, twice as big as grizzlies now. Even today on this planet, I think a lot of men go to the North Pole up towards Canada and Alaska to hunt polar bear, for the simple reason is when a polar bear sees a man, he doesn't turn and run. Typically, he will come at you because the polar bear is just as happy to eat you as he is a seal. They're not afraid of you. And these guys will go up, they dig a pit and they lie in it, and they wait for a bear to come across the ice, and they'll pop up to shoot the bear, and if the bear happens to see them, the bear turns and charges. You're now both predator and prey, and your ancestors for a millennia lived that life of predator and prey. And every animal out there is both predator and prey. The lion is a predator until he becomes weak, and then he is prey to the other lions that want to lead the troop. Or he becomes, prey to anything else out there that's hungry he's weak, He's too weak to get up and defend himself. The ants will eat him alive. So, that's a whole other side of it. And you have to, if you learn to respect the animals for what their role is, and then respect yourself and the role you play, it's a fulfilling experience.
Well, it's been great hearing some of your stories, Levi. I go back to thinking of that James Dickey poem that I told you about, the last Wolverine. I may not have the title exactly right, but which really talks about the glory of that animal and
incredible
at the same
animal.
time others. But I know I've certainly been informed of things I didn't know before we started talking here today.
Well, I appreciate y'all having me.
Oh yeah.
I'm afraid, I'm much more eloquent when I put it on paper than when I'm speaking. It's at least I have time to edit myself. But I've really, love talking about the outdoors, and my opinions maybe aren't welcome in all circles. Even from fellow hunters. But I grew up a different way.
The thing is, you're not mainstream.
I'm definitely not mainstream.
You're not mainstream.
I'm
not mainstream.
And I grew up very different than a lot of guys. A lot of guys didn't grow up. They grew up and then they started hunting. And they started hunting again because it's a trophy, it's a bragging right. And I grew up with a father that we raised animals for slaughter. We hunted not only for food, but predator control, things like that, and there was always respect. There was never a disrespect for the animal.
Mr. Hill, I thank you for your contribution to today's podcast. Thank you, Pete, for moderating this. I think we learned something today. I think we learned something very important about ourselves, if not anything else. Thank you very much for your time and for just being you.
Thank y'all very much.